Hello. Today we want to talk about open source as business. Open source is a way to share code, and open source is also a mindset. But how does open source works as a business model? About this topic, I want to talk about with Julian Hansert from Kubamatic and Christopher Branston from SVR. Before we start to talk about the topic, please introduce yourself and your companies. Who wants to start? Julian, maybe?
For sure. Hi, I'm Julian Hansert, one of the two founders of Kubamatic. We are an Hamburg-based company focusing on cloud-native technology with a focus on Kubernetes, as our brand name implies. I'm there for business development, sales, and all the fun stuff.
Yeah, hi,
Chris.
I'm Chris Branston. I work for SVA. We are a systems reseller and integrator based in Wiesbaden in Germany. And I myself manage partners. I have a fun bunch of partners out of the open source business. So it's great to be here today to talk about the technologies, the implications, and the backgrounds of open source and why it does make sense.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, just go on to talk about open source as business.
Yeah, so I do have a long background working in a Linux business, and with that having a lot of contact to the communities, to open source as is, especially kind of to the whole grassroots open source. But I think one of the main topics we should talk about right at the beginning here is that very, very often in open source, kind of the main topic, the main slogan you'll find, oh yeah, it's great because it's free, it doesn't cost money, you know, it's super, I can just use it. But I want to actually take that and turn it around a bit. And the free is not so much as free as in free beer, but it's the freedom you gain when you use open source tool sets. So the great thing we know is that in open source, we have source code that is readily available. Everybody can download it, use it, modify it to whatever you might need it for within your business, your workflow, your app, whatever you're creating. But the actual cool thing about it is also the communities attached to it. So although if I'm a business and I'm using open source software, I'm modifying it, I'm implementing it within my own infrastructure, I have a whole community of millions of people around the world who have different background, different pieces of knowledge, different jobs in different companies coming together to solve one problem centrally. And this is something that I then can use greatly within my own business, because I'm tapping into a knowledge resource I wouldn't have had. And I'm also tapping into a knowledge resource of people who might have a different view on a topic. So for me, actually, the main reason of using open source in business is the freedom we can gain by using it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a big difference as the free in free beer and the free in freedom of speech, definitely. And potentially in some cases, if the users are not familiar, they always think it as in a free beer, but there's of course a lot of stuff to do and a quite great invest to do into the knowledge in your organization and a lot of other stuff. So it's not just out of the box, but sometimes you have to educate your people. For us as an organization, we started out with a refurbished laptop in some garage. So in a co-working space here in Hamburg, my co-founder Sebastian and myself, we had well, quite a good experience and education in the field, but we didn't have anything to start with. But we started not from scratch, but on top of the shoulders of giants, and those giants have been Google and Kubernetes and the community. So that is one of the things that sticks out for me, that even a small company bootstrapping themselves out of nowhere, so Hamburg, Germany, can make it to a company as we are today, more than 80 people that can earn a living from open source by delivering services, knowledge, and a product to the community and to the customers, of course.
also coming from that, I think another point why open source is great in business is the fairness aspect. So for all of us who've been in the industry very, very long, especially maybe the people listening, working in actual IT companies and roles, a great thing is open source as its core is freely available, so I don't need to pay for it. That means just for me as a customer, I have a very, very big freedom of testing before I buy software. So it's what we call in marketing, try before you buy. And it's a really, really great thing, because with the more closed or licensed products, it's kind of, buy the product, and if it doesn't work, I've already paid my bill, and I figure, okay, this might be problematic. But the great thing about open source tool sets is I can install them, I can run them, I can start modifying them. And then when I actually go into production, when I actually make a real product out of it, I can then choose to buy a subscription, which will then give me security, which is patches and updates, and which will give me uptime guarantee by getting technical support if I run into issues. And to me, that makes so much more sense, seeing large companies and industry companies having to create projects kind of on a global scale, where multiple people from multiple continents, multiple countries are working together. And there it is really, really cool to just have a chance to actually try the product before, see if it's a good fit, see if it works correctly the way that I was imagining it to work. And then I can choose to make a purchasing decision. But this purchasing decision is also really fair, because I'm not paying for functionality I might not use. I'm not paying for a shiny logo that's out there, but what I'm actually paying for is a service that I'm using to keep my business running.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is one of our main ideas, especially at Kubamatic. So to be open here, we have an open core model. So we have a community edition that can be used standalone and out of the box. It's getting more and more easy for non-specialized users to set up Kubernetes and having a platform to run the cloud native workload. And then we have an enterprise edition for more complex, let's say globally distributed workloads, where we then say, okay, if you have such a complex environment and earn a lot of money, either directly or indirectly with the software that we delivered, you can give us some fair share out of this. So that's what we see as our way go to market, and the open source versus completely free software is, of course, an epic fight that is going on since the beginning of open source. But we decided to be honest with that from the get-go. So as we've been closed source until last year, and that was for us in order to protect our IP at the beginning. As a small company, we've seen in the past that large, for example, hyperscaler went in, took the ideas, forked them, and made a business model out of them, and let the startups stand in the rain without any way to monetize their own invention. We decided first to have it closed source, work closely with the community, as in the container days, the meetups, and the other community contributions we made. And last year, we then decided to go open source or open core, as I just mentioned, and have the strengths in the market to protect our IP and knowledge, and use it, of course, as basis of our business that we are providing here. So for me, this is a great opportunity. Only thing that I regret going open source is that we didn't do this earlier, but it of course takes a lot of self-confidence to go out there and then discuss with a lot of people that will look into the source code. But since then, we've got a lot of good partnerships, like with the SVA and other partners out there that prove that this was definitely the right way.
Not to forget that Kubamatic is one of the major distributors of Kubernetes. As such a small company, it's a point to underline, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. As the number one contributor in Europe and top 10 in the world, so like was being named and being on the same statistic page as Google, VMware, and the large ones out there. That's for us, of course, always showing that the Goliath against David is always a battle that is still out there, and we can potentially make our impact into the open source universe.
I mean, I also think Kubernetes is such a perfect example of how kind of open source is a multiplicator and how open source can be lived, because we have at the heart of it always, this big project, Kubernetes, it's a global spanning worldwide project where a lot of people contribute into. So there's a highly diverse bit of code out there. And the beauty of a company like Kubernetes is you just take this very, very general project and put your own twist on it and give it your own flavor and think about, hey, what do the customers want? What solutions do they need? And how can I adapt my own way of thinking and my idea I had with a piece of software, and then create my own flavor of it that I can bring to the customers. And I think that is pretty much open source, because I'm a firm believer there's always a bit more behind it than a repository on GitLab and a couple of computer people hacking code into a PC. But there's the business side that we are on. There's the people behind it. There's the cloud report, for example, where we're trying to create a knowledge transfer, where we're kind of an extended community of people who maybe don't write code, but know how to do great business with the products and projects that we're seeing out there.
Absolutely. And that's not a one-way street. As we see now, for example, with the partnership, the interpretation of our software that is going on at the moment, for example, when the consultants from SVIA are implementing it, having POCs and having it in their test center, coming back with questions and use cases we never thought of. So this is like a mutual benefit that we have in our microcosmos, but that works, of course, on the larger scale as well.
Cool. Take customer as a point to go on. What do customers in Germany, for example, expect when they hear open source? And are these expectations justified?
Well, a lot of the customers still kind of live in this 90s, early 2000s mindset that open source is automatically someone with really thick glasses, wearing their t-shirt inside out in front of a PC, hacking into the digital world we call the internet, which maybe at some points still is true, but is one of the cool parts about working in communities, about getting together, no matter in real life or in front of the PC. But kind of this old cliche really isn't justified anymore. As I just mentioned a little earlier, there's so much more people in the supply chain of open source and open source tool sets and the businesses behind it. There's people who will help spread the message. There's people who create their own flavors of software. There's people like me working kind of in the middle for one of the resellers, trying to consult customers on their way to, for example, a digital transformation, on their way to implement a new technology like container technology. So I really think in the meantime, what we need to do is interpret open source also as a way of thinking and as a lifestyle that I can bring into my company. And that's where I say the kind of old picture is not justified anymore, but the justification of it is the pure essence of open source.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So in the old days, when there were only the large companies like Google be able to run open source at scale, those are gone, and that's one of the beautiful things that are happening through the CNCF. We have standards. Stuff is getting easier to interconnect. The whole open source stack is out there and ready to use with the operators that are coming, not having the need for a highly sophisticated team, but you can then potentially go and get those open source services for you out of the box, and potentially with some experts running it for you. So it's not the decision, do I want to do it by myself, but there's some different flavors. And yeah, we're seeing this especially in Germany, that is potentially a bit skeptical about stuff at the beginning, having now much more trust into open source. Large companies are adopting it. Traditional companies, car manufacturers are using it, and it's not kind of the weird kid anymore, but it's standard. And even those large companies are contributing upstream. That was not the case in the past, or not the case as a standard, but now they are allocating or giving back to the community as well. So that's a mind shift in the traditional customer or user environment in the open source that we've been seeing in the last years as well. So a lot of stuff is changing at the moment. A new way of thinking infrastructure, software is coming up, or in general how to use software in an enterprise. And that's what we are trying to push forward, of course, with our events and all the stuff that we are doing out there.
So the evolution is going on. What do you see for the future? What is needed? What will come?
So what I think is kind of a paradox, but a cool one, is as we've heard, kind of open source gives you the chance to freely interpret a piece of code, to use it the way you want, to give it your own twist and flavor. But while we're doing that, for example, in a project like Kubernetes, which is then like the big center project that everybody's working on from their angle and their side, what we're actually creating while having a high diversity and all these new flavors and ways of thinking is actually we're creating standardization. And what I'm seeing happening right now, and what's going to happen even further, is that the open tool sets and especially the open APIs will lead to a form of IT standardization. So in the future, in the best case, it really won't matter. I can have a workload on my mobile phone, I can have it on my laptop, it could be on a server, it could be somewhere in the cloud, but through having consistent and open layers that I can use in between, I'm creating kind of this worldwide global standard that everybody can work with, which will kind of streamline the collaboration, which will kind of streamline costs if you are using it in a business sense, and it will make it a lot easier for people to interconnect and create technology together.
Absolutely. So Kubernetes and containers will be the new standard. Everything and all design will be designed around this packaging format. It's so how can we get this into a container and not how can we get this on this VM or whatever. So there will be a total mind shift towards how can we do processes that will then be based on the 12-factor principles, for example, and other stuff. And we will see that. That's my assumption, as we've seen it in the real shipping container shipping industry, that there will be 80% of the workloads in containers and potentially 20% in VMs or in other formats. So that's my assumption for the future, as we will have the majority of the applications running best case after new methods that are out there.
Okay, you mentioned, maybe last question for now, you mentioned the mind shift. What is needed to create this mind shift?
I think it just needs similar things like the container days, like the Cloud Native Foundation, the Linux Foundation, because I find it really, really great. I've been in the industry for quite some time, and you always had, at least in Germany, these very, very set dates of different conventions you would travel to, of different big companies financing these conventions and pushing the mindset at these conventions in a certain direction because they are paying for it. But what I'm seeing now is that more and more even kind of business events are becoming more of this meetup style, more of kind of a community meetup where everybody's a competitor in that sense, but everybody gets together around the project or the technology that we're all using. And this is a beautiful form, in my opinion, of knowledge transfer, where everybody kind of gets to keep their company secret and their special twist and kind of, you know, their reason for being, their own USP. But it's a great way to get people together. And I hope that we'll see more and more of these kind of general overarching communities grow and then kind of filing out into separate events on a local level, sometimes with international kind of audience joining. Today, a lot of it is hybrid, which is kind of, yeah, cool and not so cool, but it just gives a chance to reach far more people and to fan out your message far broader. And I think that's really, really great. So I'm hoping to see more events like the Container Days.
Yeah, hopefully there will be more out there, and we are seeing much events that are pushing this. So that is a great thing. When we've started 5 years ago with the Container Days, we've been the first guys, and there were even a real container shipping company asking for, hey, can we potentially sponsor it? And we said, it's not the real deal. We are IT containers, different story. But yeah, some more stories from the distant past. So there's two things that I'm seeing. Of course, the grassroots, those early adopters, individual contributors that are potentially then starting to bring those new topics they've learned on a meetup or wherever in the internet to their companies. But this is the more like the push that we are seeing from the bottom up. We are seeing now through competition and through the necessity to innovate fast, that a lot of companies seeing this as an strategic move they have to make within the next years. Otherwise, they will be not. They will lose competitive edge, and that is now what is changing. So the early stages, the pioneer days are over, and now we are coming to a stage where a lot of the large companies are waking up, seeing that software is an strategic part of their core business and not just some random supporting function, but really the core of their business, and they need to innovate. Otherwise they will have quite some problems in order to keep pace in the competitive environment they are in.
One very important thing coming from a reseller and system integrator is at SVA, we do have about 150 partners, so partnerships with products that we sell to the market. And what I've seen happen a lot is this big discussion saying like containers will kill virtualization and digital transformation is always this one-way street heading ahead and up, but never looking back. And one thing will always replace the other. But what I actually tell all of my sales colleagues when I present my partner solutions to them is, no, it's not going to exchange the one thing or make something else superfluous, but actually what we're doing here, and especially container technology, is just a logic further development of what we've been doing. So let's be realistic. Even in a big public cloud, there's a server somewhere with an operating system, a piece of software running on it, and that will still exist, and there's still a need for that. But what we can do is now take a new technology to reiterate and just further develop the tools that we've already created to fit with modern usage, to fit with a modern infrastructure, to put it wherever we need. And I think that's always very important to say, that if we have an event like the Container Days, you know, it's not a meeting where everything old gets bashed and who uses a server anyway, and metal is so 90s. But it's actually a meeting of forward-looking visionaries, or that's how I'd like to interpret it, who will say, okay, we've gone this and that far, implementing hard and software into our businesses, creating networks that are publicly available. And now comes the next step, that we're making it very, very agile and very, very scalable with a technology like container technology.
Absolutely, and that's what I said before with the 80-20. So there will always be workloads that potentially will not fit in a container for whatever reason, and that's the reason why we are super active in the KubeWord community as well. The project. Having this as one of our features, so to call, if I can, or functionalities, so that you can run VMs on top of containers. So you don't have to throw away everything. There will be legacy running alongside with containers, and you don't have to throw everything away and make it new. So there will be definitely ways to transition from A to B, and yeah, that's one of the great things, that we have a partner that knows how to take you on this journey. So that's potentially one of the strongest points that we are seeing here in this partnership.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the cool summary at the end. So I learned today that open source is not only based for business, for IT companies, but it will be base of maybe every company and every business company. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Cool. Thanks for having us, and see everybody at the Container Days.
See you there, and
Yes.
thank you very much. And yeah, it was a pleasure.